Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I am Larry Rhodes.
And I'm Faithless Forrest. And we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you are not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people curious about living a life free of supernatural beliefs.
This is a call-in show. However, we only have one phone line, so if you can't get through, we invite you to send your email questions to us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
All right. And Larry, the Atheist Society of Knoxville?
Oh, to the side. It's the ASK, Atheist Society of Knoxville, is a fun meetup group that often meets at a bar or eatery. Sometimes we even do karaoke. Tonight's meetup at Barley's for happy hour is tonight after the show for food, drink, and conversation. Fridays, we try to meet at the Beer Market. Join our meetup to be able to see the calendar and find all of our times and locations. When you do get to our meetups, look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table. And as Matt Dillahunty of the Atheist Society, or Atheist Experience of Austin, Texas says, everyone is welcome to visit our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
The monthly activities of the Rationalists of East Tennessee are like this. The first and third Sunday mornings are usually lectures and lively roundtable discussions. This Sunday, June 17th, will be a double header. How old is the universe? And the shape of inner space, string theory, and the geometry of the universe. It'll be fun. The fourth Sunday of this month is a reflections gathering, a potluck afternoon meeting at a member's home. I take it back. This is a special month. It's June. What happens on about June 21st?
Oh, the solstice.
Winter solstice. The summer solstice.
Summer solstice.
Oh, wrong season there on my part. I think we're having a solstice party instead.
Okay.
But check out our website, rationalists, with an S on the end, .org.
Be sure to visit both websites for rationalists.org and knoxvilleatheist.org for additional monthly program details, all the future months for books, times, and locations.
Today, with viewers' help, we will further explore logical fallacies.
Now, on to In the News.
Okay, well, first are some Freethought birthdays in June. Norma Jean Mortonstern Baker, better known as Marilyn Monroe. She was born June 1st, 1926. And a few notes here from Wikipedia. Monroe was a friend of Ella Fitzgerald and helped Ella in her career. Ella Fitzgerald later recounted, I owe Marilyn Monroe a real debt. It was because of her that I played the Macambo, a very popular nightclub in the 50s. She personally called the owner of the club and told him she wanted me booked immediately, and if he would do it, she would take a front table every night. She told him, and it was true, due to Marilyn's superstar status, that the press would go wild. The owner said yes, and Marilyn was there, front table every night. The press went overboard. After that, I never had to play a small jazz club again. She was an unusual woman, a little ahead of her time, and she didn't know it. The daughter of Monroe's last psychiatrist, Joan Greenson, said that Marilyn was passionate about equal rights, rights for blacks, rights for the poor. She identified strongly with the worker. In Monroe's last interview, she pleaded with the reporter to end the article with the following quote, which we'll share with you. She says, what I really want to say, that the world really needs, is a real feeling of kinship. Everybody, stars, laborers, Negroes, Jews, Arabs, we are all brothers. Please don't make me a joke. End the interview with what I believe. So we'll that's how we'll end the quote about her.
Works for me. Adam Smith was baptized on June 16th, 1723. From Wikipedia, Smith was a Scottish social philosopher and a pioneer of political economy. One of the key figures of the Scottish Enlightenment, Smith is the author of The Principles Which Lead and Direct Philosophical Inquiries, illustrated by the history of astronomy prior to 1758, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, 1759, and An Inquiry into the Nature and Cause of the Wealth of Nations in 1776. I wonder what he would think of this current situation about the wealth of nations.
Yeah.
Smith is widely cited as the father of modern economics and capitalism, and is still among the most influential thinkers in the field of economics today. I don't know about that.
Well, the free marketers will pick and choose from his stuff. The theory of moral sentiments, especially, is where they get this concept of the immaterial hand.
No, I was saying that he was still among the most influential speakers. He died a long time ago. He couldn't be.
Oh, speakers.
Thinkers, I mean. It is generally believed that while at Oxford, Smith rejected Christianity and became a deist. Economist Ronald Coase was challenged the view that Smith was a deist, stating that while Smith may have referred to the great architect of the universe in his works, other scholars have very much exaggerated the extent to which Adam Smith was committed to a belief in a personal God. Coase based Coase based this principally on an analysis of a passage in Wealth of Nations, in which Smith writes that the curiosity of man about the phenomenon of nature, such as the generation, the life, growth, and dissolution of plants and animals, had led men to inquire into their causes, and that superstition first attempted to satisfy this curiosity by referring to all these wonderful appearances to the immediate agency of the gods. Philosophy afterwards endeavored to account for them from more familiar causes, or from such as mankind were better acquainted with than the agency of gods. Smith also was a close friend and later executor for David Hume, who is commonly characterized in his own time as an atheist. Smith's written tributes to Hume, which stressed his courage in the face of death in spite of his irreligiosity, attracted much controversy.
All right. Well, that's our regular in the news. What else is in the news locally, Larry?
In the Knoxville newspaper, we have, it's a really response to a previous letter that someone talked about the monkey bill and its unintended consequences. This writer, Jeffrey P. Wood, writes many things saying that the monkey bill was a good thing, and he puts a lot of logical fallacies into this letter, which I thought would be a good idea.
Since that's the topic of the show today, well, let's explore this letter.
Okay, he says, I write in response to a letter writer who thinks that the so-called monkey bill put forth by State Representative Bill Dunn has unintended consequences that are bad news for creationists.
Okay, well, no fallacies there yet.
No, he's just making statements at this point.
Statement of his principle.
All scientists follow the scientific method. So far, so good. One of the hallmarks of this method is repeatability. So far, so good. Which is impossible when studying origin.
Oh, so far, so bad now.
So bad. I mean, the sentence itself makes sense, but the thing about it is, evolution doesn't have to do with the origin of life.
Doesn't have to do with the origin of life. Now, Darwin's book is, of course, The Origin of Species.
Right.
So let's keep that in mind. We'll plow on.
Neither creation nor evolution can be termed genuine science. Now, there he's off on shaky ground, because evolution has been known and proven to be science for, what, 200 years? 100 years anyway, 150 years? Science of modern biologies, medicine, chemistry, all of these fields are based on the fact that that life changes over time. The genetic frequency of
alleles changes
in a population over
is
time.
Measurable in short times,
right.
And we see that the fossil record changes immensely
right.
over what's our immense times.
Right.
But the point I think he's making, and you'll hear it often, the guy up at the Creation Museum, he just coaches people into saying it, that you know, when scientists talk about, well, we have evidence that the Earth was created 4.5 billion years ago, they'll say, well, were you there? So this point about origins, though, we can address another way. And you imagine a family portrait where you've got like 5 generations. You've got, you know, people who are going to be in their 80s and 90s, and people who are infants. Now, in that one family, you don't see the whole life of any individual, but you sample the lives of all of them. And if we happen to include a picture of a birth occurring, we would now know about the origins. So we can do that with respect to planets right now. We can look out with our telescopes and see planets being formed. We don't have to invoke any supernatural 6-day explanation for that. So when we're discussing the origins of things, we don't have to say that, oh, we've got to be there in order to observe it. So in this case, he's made a reasoning error because he thought he'd covered all the bases, but he had not.
Right. Since neither position can be proved scientifically, which again he is misrepresenting the case. Evolution can be proved scientifically. We must look at the evidence and make our conclusions according to our preconceptions. We should look at the evidence and make our conclusions according to our preconceptions.
Wow, he could have saved time by just making his conclusions without bothering to look at the
Why
evidence.
wouldn't look at the evidence, you know?
So,
we just go with our preconceptions.
So, in other words, he's essentially he's abandoned what amounts to science, because science used to go by the older name natural philosophy. Philosophy means the love of knowledge, and nature is that which is not supernatural. Right. And so right here, he's given up all hope of doing science. He doesn't even understand it.
Right. And what gets me is that the basic difference between religion or faith and science is that science looks at nature, looks at the real world, the physical universe, and tries to read the facts of the matter and then come up with conclusions. The religious, however, look at the Bible, see the conclusions that the Bible has drawn, then look at nature and see what they can find, pick and cherry pick to fit the conclusions that are already in the Bible. And that's just backwards. That's just not a good way to do science.
It's a little worse than backwards in that you're doomed to have wrong conclusions. Because the way science really works is that whatever the current best explanation is, you look for things that don't fit. Because that, and only there, is where you get the chance to advance science. So religion cannot advance because it's not looking for where its errors are.
Right.
It is intrinsically frozen in time.
Right.
With the possible exception that what they do is they redefine the meaning of words, because when it becomes obvious to anyone who can understand science that the world wasn't created in 6 days, then they've got to redefine what a day was.
Well, the other part of that is that if you've already got all your answers in a book, why even bother looking at science or nature, nature using the scientific method, if you're going to throw out anything that doesn't fit the answers you've already got?
And of course, why do they do that? What it is they're trying to catch up to all of the benefits that science and technology have brought to mankind, and making and keeping promises that religion woefully fails at.
Right. Picking up where he said that we need to make our conclusions according to our preconceptions, which, if you think about it, as there's 7 billion people on the earth, and there's 7 billion sets of preconceptions. We cannot go with that. I mean, on its face, it's false. But he says, why is this concept so hard to understand? It appears that evolution is a godless faith system bent on stamping out all opposing faiths. It's not a faith if you've got evidence that you can repeat in a lab or be able to find in the fossil record or in the genetic lines to be able to support the theory.
It always amazes me that they want to try and equate science with faith, and they do so as if it's dragging science down. That's a tacit admission that science has surpassed in terms of driving benefits to mankind.
And he did, just previous to that, he compared evolution to creationism as genuine science, or not being genuine science. I mean, he's just lumping everything in the same baskets and trying to shake out the things that he wants to put forward.
Yeah.
As to his claim that biological evolution is not a theory, it is a fact recorded in the fossil records. This is what he was quoting the other person in the previous letter. I submit that the fossil record is the evolutionist's worst nightmare. Evolution says life evolved over long periods of time with numerous transitional forms found in the fossil record. Creation said God created each kind complete from the start. Hundreds of years of searching for and finding millions of fossils has not produced even one transitional form. That is blatantly false. If you understand evolution, you understand that every organism and every fossil that's ever been found is a transitional form. It is, every organism on the face of the earth is a stasis picture of the organism in this state and time. But previously, look different, and later on down the road, if it has descendants in a different environment, it will change.
And in fact, we can even talk about ourselves as we are a fossil that represent the current state we are. And I have toes. Now, toes used to be gripping fingers, but they're not anymore. At best, they're something that might break if I put too much force on them. So they're not a real good hoof, and they're not good fingers anymore. They're the evidence of the evolution that has happened. Well, and we don't even have to resort to fossils.
Oh, let's look at, you're talking about toes and hoofs, let's look at horses. Go online, look up the evolution of horses. You'll see back millions of years ago, there was a horse called an Eohippus, which is about the size of a small dog. They had toes. They were small horses. You literally can recognize
They're running
the hoarseness of them. And then you'll go through the equus to the modern horse. And the toes eventually fused into a hoof.
As I recall, the horse stands on what amounts to its middle finger, and there's intermediate forms where the toes have grown smaller, they're no longer contacting the earth.
Right.
And so they're useless as toes, they're still there.
Right.
We know that dolphins occasionally are born with hind limbs, useless, but once in a while they still have them, they're vestigial.
Right. And the creationists and the religionists will always talk about prophecy, how they can prophesize the future or how it's been done in the past. Well, they can't, because, I mean, if you look at the prophecies that they've done, they've hit here, they've missed here, they've totally missed the mark other places. They only really report on the ones that have hit, and they're usually very generic. You know, this,
if you're
a nation will fall, you know, type of thing. But the evolutionary biologists got together with the geologists saying that the transition from fish to amphibian probably happened so many thousands or millions of years ago.
Approximately 375 million years
So
ago.
they said, where are the stones from that time period still available to us? Some of them have been subducted, some of them have been destroyed. Let's go to the area on the earth where those stones are extant. They're available to us, and let's look in those stones to see if we can find something like that. And they did, and they found Tiktaalik, which was a transitional form between fish and amphibian. It was probably more amphibian at this time, but it looked, part of it looked like a fish and part of it looked like a...
Right, you cannot clearly say it's one or the other.
A frog.
Which is the whole point.
Right.
It's not clearly one or the other. So it blends these kinds.
Right.
In the letters, the writer of this letter, you know, he talks about kinds, but of course he never defines kinds. And you know, I get the feeling that if we were talking to him, he said he wants to see a cat being born from a dog, and that's not what evolution asserts.
Right. And of course there's Archaeopteryx, which was a dinosaur that had feathers, and of course we all know now from
we could say it's a bird that has teeth and claws.
Right.
It's both.
So, like I say, every single form on the earth is some kind of transitional form from a previous state to a later state. And yes, humans are still evolving. The writer, this is the letter continuing about the other writer. The writer appealed to the usual suspects as examples of evolution in action today, but did the animals cited actually evolve? No, they just displayed the range of adaptation that each kind has. He's making a flat assertion with no evidence here. This is another fallacy. Just he's pulling facts out of the air and touting them as true. They just displayed the range of adaptation that each kind has. And of course he's using the word kind from the Bible. The peppered moths, finches, and insects are what they always were. Every single organism that's ever coming on the planet is going to come from an organism just like it, or very much just like it. There may be tiny, tiny, tiny changes between generations, but if you accumulate the generations over thousands of generations, you're going to see much change. And if you separate the generations geologically, you will see new species evolve that can no longer interbreed.
Well, it was funny as I read that, and he talked about the moths, finches, and insects are still what they always were, and I was thinking about his use of the word kinds. Well, we could actually make his statement true if we say, well, they're of the same kind because they all have DNA. In that sense, we are all of the same kind, just as we and the chimps and the trees and the bacteria are all of the same kind. So in that sense, he's right. But of course, that means evolution is true.
Right. In closing, he says, I ask that since both positions must be accepted on faith, what gives you hope to face each day? I am the product of he says, am I the product of mindless evolution over endless time, or am I created in the very image of a loving God who spoke the cosmos into existence fairly recently? That's a false dichotomy, one of the logical fallacies that we talked about. He's not the product of mindless evolution over endless time. Evolution works through natural selection. It's an evolution and environmental pressures. It's not mindless.
It's not random.
It's not random.
Not just going nowhere.
Okay, but it doesn't have a mind or a purpose, so that part of it might be considered correct. And endless time, no, all of this happened within the last few billion years.
All right.
And plus, he says, am I created in the very image of a loving God who spoke the cosmos into existence fairly recently? In other words, he's saying all of this without any evidence at all, and using faith to put it out there, where evolutionary biologists have evidence to support their
Well, Larry,
statements.
we've got a call. Perhaps we'll get to talk more on this subject.
Okay. Welcome to Freethought Forum. May we have a name or a nickname?
My name is Al.
Hello, Al.
Hello, Al. Are you Pastor Al?
This is he.
Hello. Thanks for calling. And today's subject is logical fallacies, and we were just talking about evolution. Do you have a comment or a question for us?
I want to answer the question at the bottom of the screen.
Uh-huh.
Does religion use false reasoning?
So, does religion use false reasoning?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. So...
And I'd like to say something else besides that.
Sure.
Instead of always trying to slam God, the Bible, faith, etc., that you say that doesn't exist, and you're always fighting something that doesn't exist, why don't you just try to prove your insanity?
Well, thank you very much for the cogent, well-reasoned argument, Pastor Al. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, you know, Al, I was hoping after some of our previous conversations that we could have a little bit of back and forth. You know, we believe the world is natural, and one of the ways we say that is one of the properties of the natural world is gravity. And we can prove that every time we demonstrate gravity. And we can do the same with electric phenomena, and we can do the same with magnetic phenomena, and we can do the same with taking apart the chemicals of life into the atoms of which they're constituted. And we've now learned how to take apart the atoms into the pieces inside them. So that tells us a lot about the natural world. That is science. Now, I've never seen an angel, and I don't think you could demonstrate an angel to me.
Or a soul, or a demon, or any of the other myriad of supernatural beings that most people who are religious swear by and that exist in the Bible today.
And I know that every mind that I've interacted with is in a body, and that I can talk to those people and hear them, because that's how atoms work. We speak, we make vibrations, that is sound.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we got another call. Let's grab it. Hello, thank you for calling Freethought Forum. Can we please have a name or a nickname?
My name is Paul.
Hello, Paul. Thanks for calling. Have you watched the show before? And
I've called in. I've called in before too. So
okay,
maybe
great.
I spoke to you and maybe the younger folks that are on there. So
all right. Thank you for calling. And today's subject is logical fallacies, or anything you wanted to ask or comment on.
well, I mean, really, you said religion uses false reasoning. I think one of the things you talked about just a second ago about evolution and all that and so forth. I've heard it said that the world has the appearance of design. It wasn't designed. Would atheists kind of hold that credo?
Well, we would say that yes, it has the appearance of design because of certain natural laws that cause things to fall together. Gravity causes atoms to fall together to form stars and planets. Chemistry the laws of chemistry cause molecules to fall together to create amino acids. That type of thing has the appearance of design, but we see no evidence of a supernatural force with an intelligence driving this type of thing.
Okay, here's another question. Is there information in the DNA in the cell?
Yes. And by information, of course, what we mean is that there's a pattern, and that pattern is passed to subsequent generations because that's the recipe that a cell uses for the chemistry that then produces, in the case of multicellular creatures, bodies, which then can reproduce and make subsequent generations.
Right. I mean, I've taken biology in school or in college, and one of the things we learned about was how that there's information. The people that describe what happens inside the cell is how they call it translation, transcription, and then of course the proteins are produced.
Mm-hmm.
How does naturalistic perspective account for the complexity, and if all the natural laws play in this, how do the natural laws account for the information that is embedded in the cell?
Okay, well,
what's the process in which that information, now you talk about patterns, well, there's patterns everywhere. There's a pattern in a book that I read, but there's information in that. I can get A, or B, 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 B.
Yeah, but a book we know was created by a mind. Okay? Now, you're asking him a specific question, and I think he's ready to answer you.
yeah, so the way it works is that all that information gets there a little piece at a time. What we don't know is, so to speak, what was the first reproducing system. And in fact, if you read Darwin's Origin of Species, the last paragraph or so, he talks about, thus we see how from so simple a beginning, from one or a few creatures into which life was originally breathed, he's making a biblical reference there, such diverse and marvelous forms of life can be and are being generated. I'm paraphrasing, but the point being is that once you've got a reproducing system, and if it reproduces imperfectly, so you get some errors,
Yeah.
then those errors represent new information. Now, whether that information is good or bad has no bearing on the likelihood of that information being generated.
And I would like to...
But then nature selects amongst all those reproducing creatures who are competing for scarce resources, and it selects against those that don't use the resources as well. So the cells that are our body are the result of numerous little improvements selected for by an unthinking natural environment.
Okay, now you said just a second ago that you don't know initially how that living process occurred. I mean, if you've got anybody that's ever taken cell anatomy or cell biology or anything at that level.
But Paul, no, there's no reason to assume that cells were the first living creatures. There's no reason at all.
What now?
Amino acids,
There's no
RNA,
reason-
DNA.
There's no reason to assume that a cell is the first living
Right.
thing.
It was a long time after the first self-replicating system before a cell actually formed.
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, if you think about, you guys said there's got to be information. I mean, for a cell to replicate, there's got to be information.
But we're not talking about cells as the first form of life.
What do you think the first form of life was then?
Well, amongst the theories are, they call it metabolic first, where there is chemistry going on that's not inside a membrane. And so you would have chemistry going on in the ocean, in regions that reproduces, or that continues itself. An analogy I'd like to say is a flame. A flame is where the heat of the flame melts the wax, which then wicks up the wick and sustains the flame. It's a dynamic system. If you stop it, it's like it's dead, but yet in a way it's not really alive. But it's this dynamic system. The first life was probably something like that. It was chemistry that was going on that influenced other chemistry, and
Just do a search on the earliest self-replicating systems. I'm sure that you'd be able to find quite a bit on the internet.
there are. There's some,
I've done some reading and research on this. I mean, to think about how would something was necessary for replication, the amount of things that need to be in place.
No, think of a simple crystal. You have a simple chemical bond that starts replicating, and before you know it, you have huge crystals that
a
you
snowflake
can use. Yeah.
or a big quartz crystal. Those are systems that replicate.
That's a non-living.
That's right. There's a very
But they
small
replicate.
a boundary between non-living and living, and there's no reason why once it starts getting into a living, self-replicating and changing chemical system, that it can't eventually evolve into maybe a membrane that would then cover the cell, cover the RNA that's self-replicating inside it, keeping salt water out, keeping good water in, fresh water, et cetera, and then turn into a more complicated living being or living system.
Well, I mean, if you think about this, I mean, look at that. I mean, I'm not sure if it's. I mean, you're saying you're not sure if it's a cell or what. You're not sure. I'm going to assume.
No, we're sure it's not a cell.
Not a
It's
cell.
the first living thing.
Well, I mean, the simplest form of life is a virus.
And in fact, there are people who can have very valid arguments over whether or not you call that life.
Some people would say it's not living.
You can crystallize it, for instance.
It can process, metabolize.
Some viruses don't metabolize.
Yeah,
Some viruses
are,
just replicate.
Yeah, so it's a nice example of where it's kind of blurred the distinction. It's not a clear cut either way.
Well, wait. Well, the reason I'm trying to get somewhere in my argument.
Sure.
Okay,
and thank you for doing this.
Just a simple cell, whether a virus or bacteria or amoeba, that's simple. That's a simple form of with DNA. I mean, they have the same components as a big. They have a lot of similar components as we do as human beings.
Yeah, we say that the same DNA coding sequence is used throughout all of life.
Right. Exactly. Okay.
Thus, it points to a common universal ancestor for all known living creatures.
I'm not even talking about that right yet. I'm just saying that in the basic form, you've got different components built into that DNA. You've got different forms of molecules. You've got water. You've got carbon. You've got hydrogen. You've got numerous forms of minerals in this. They've got to be they've got to be packaged into a membrane. They've got to be put in the right order, in the right sequence.
It's very complicated, yes. Go on.
Yeah.
So now, what would be more, you're telling me that this all happened naturally.
No, that did not.
Well, wait a minute.
It did not. You've gone too far.
Well, you're saying the natural laws and the physics and the things in the world accounted for all these things coming together and functioning properly.
No, you've gone too far. That's the point. You've gone too far. What is thought that happened is that chemistry began, and then there was a transition to an information storage system, and that was probably RNA, because RNA can be a catalyst and it can store information. It doesn't need a membrane around it. You can do it in a beaker without a membrane. So when by the time you talk about DNA and all those complexities, you've already gone too far. By the way, let's drag all this back. Let's assume that we can't explain that. That doesn't mean that you and I aren't cousins to one another, and that you and I aren't cousins to chimpanzees.
Well, I'm not even talking about that. That's not even initially what I'm actually...
But actually, that's what evolution is all about. Evolution is about the common inheritance and the common brotherhood of all known life using DNA and RNA.
Okay, so
that's what evolution is all about. So if you're prepared to say that Darwin is right, you understand that Darwin is right, so far as, modified with,
and remember, he had nothing to say about the origin of life.
Right.
It's
So if we're talking about evolution, we're not talking about the origin of life. And if you were going to say, you understand Darwin is right, you and I are cousins distantly, and you and I and chimps are cousins distantly, and you and I and pine trees are cousins distantly,
Carrots and locusts.
then we can change the subject to biogenesis, abiogenesis. But if not, please talk about evolution, because you're not talking about evolution.
No, I'm actually talking about, well, I mean, you brought up evolution, and I think you went back, I called it, I came in part way, so that's
Yeah.
my fault. I didn't hear the whole-
We were reviewing a letter in today's Knoxville News Sentinel, or perhaps it was yesterday.
I'm also addressing, does religion use false reasoning?
Yeah,
And
okay.
I'm kind of addressing that also in this. I'm kind of tying in the understanding of the chemistry and biology and all this stuff into that right there. To me, it's like, okay, you're saying that something you can use like chemistry, like let's say fire. Fire by itself can replicate, can burn, but if I take fire, put it in an engine with other components around it, that fire can actually is a piece of a bigger whole.
Okay.
Well, the same thing can be said about a cell. There's certain things that happen in a cell.
There's a big difference. The engine cannot replicate itself, and it cannot pass on its genes, and it cannot have transcription errors that will cause a newer generation to be slightly different.
I'm just using the basic idea of design. The truck that I drive every day has fire in it.
Yeah, but
Designed by an intelligence that it causes me where I can drive down the road. It has a computer. It has everything that to monitor speed. I can adjust the cruise control, all this stuff. There's one piece of it that's fire.
yeah.
But there's other pieces in play. Well, I know my truck was designed.
Well, that's because
the complexity of the cell is more complex. That cell is more complex than my.
Yeah.
Well, we can say it's designed as well, but it's designed by natural processes called natural selection. Now, there doesn't have to be an imaginary or, supernatural intelligent being. How can you posit that? I mean, where do the laws of logic come in and say there's a supernatural being out there who creates everything?
Well, I mean, there's signs of it. There's intelligence built in. You said there's information.
No, there is not intelligence built in.
Well, there's evidence of information. Where does the information come from? It comes from something that has an intelligence or other information. To me, the logical conclusion is that the cell was designed by someone.
For a process. No, you're inserting one, and that's where the false reasoning comes in. You're saying it as if you know the answer, and you don't. You're saying it was designed by someone. No, it was designed by something. It could be a someone, it could be a something, it could be a process. That's also a false dichotomy. It's I can't think of the other one. But anyway, you're limiting your choices to one thing by saying it's someone did it.
Well, then but you are too, though.
No, I'm saying it's something. I'm leaving open the opportunity that it could be a someone. I'm saying it's something.
But we need evidence for it.
We have evidence of a process that's doing this. We don't have an evidence for a being that's doing it.
Yeah.
What if the design itself is evidence of the being?
It is not, though, because there's an alternate explanation.
And Occam's razor says to use the one that doesn't
the least amount
of additional hypothesis. Yes. And again,
Paul,
positing a God is a huge hypothesis to throw on top of it.
But Paul, when we're talking about evolution, what we really mean is the explanation Darwin had for the variety of species around us. Now, Darwin was not addressing the origin of life, and you cannot overturn Darwin by talking about a different subject. Do you understand?
But there's a starting point.
It's a red herring.
But
there's a starting point.
Okay, and
it evolved from.
And let's pretend for a moment that the flying spaghetti monster made the first cell. Now, the flying spaghetti monster made the first cell, but chimpanzees and humans are related. Do you understand that?
Well, we're related in that sense, and I agree with you that the fact that
we had a common ancestor 7 million years or so ago.
And
do you understand that?
We're all made of DNA. We all are from DNA. I will agree with that.
And we had a common ancestor.
Well, you're assuming that from Darwin's.
No, we can prove it. It's proven.
No.
How can you prove that? I mean, what's your proof that we're a common ancestor?
Because we have strings of DNA in all living things that we can trace our ancestry back to the first living things.
Yeah. So there is a common machinery that life has, and that is the machinery by which we reproduce.
So what you're saying to me is that a Ford and a Chevy came from the same place. They're common in the sense they have four wheels, they have a motor, they have a steering wheel, but...
No, what I'm saying is that my ancestors, I came from the combination of two cells from Carolyn and Roland Erickson.
Right.
And Roland came from the combination of two cells from Alma and Emil, and so on. If we go back far enough, there were combinations of cells happening with, some distant ancestor of mine, and some of those cousins went off to the chimpanzee branch. It all happens through wet chemistry. There's no Ford distributors and Chevy alternators involved. It's all wet chemistry.
As an analogy.
We still haven't done our mid-program break. Do you think we ought to go ahead and wrap this up?
Paul, we thank you for talking with us about it, and we really urge you to understand when you're talking about evolution, you're talking about the common descent of multicellular creatures and how species come into existence, not the origin of life. And we'd like to break and do our mid-program sponsor acknowledgement now. But we want to say thank you for calling in and conversing on this with us.
I appreciate it. Call in again.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, mid-program break?
Yeah. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by those organizations and by individual contributions. Shows are live most every Tuesday from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern on Community Access TV. You can also see us streaming online. For fans outside of the Knoxville area, go to ctvknox.org.
You can send us feedback by email by the address on your screen or soon to be up there, freethoughtforum@yahoo.com. But don't wait, this is a call-in show, and we are live today, June 12th, 2012. You can call the viewer, the number on the screen down in front of our desk.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets several times during the week, and we have evening meetups for food, drink, and conversation. We have a little commercial break we could go to for a little more information on ASK.
If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun.
All right, well, welcome back. I want to talk briefly about the Rationalists of East Tennessee, the other sponsor of this show. We have lively presentations and discussions on subjects both topical and timeless, such as the influence of money in politics, was Jesus a real person, the history of life, and the four horsemen of atheists. We've also got a monthly book club, and in September we're going to do this book. It's an interesting one. This is the Jefferson Bible. This is the first Bible I ever bought. And
it's in 4 languages.
I've only read the English portion of it. And what Jefferson did is he bought 2 copies of each Bible in 4 different languages, and he cut them up to make a story of the life of Jesus, free of the supernatural part. He was trying to synthesize a moral story only.
Right. One of the first things he did was take the Old Testament and toss it out. Yeah. It's just such full of
It is basically just the 4 Gospels, and then only excerpts of them. So this will be the September book, and I want to pitch this one. I bought the Smithsonian reproduction. It's actually a photo reproduction of his own handwriting. It's a real cool thing. And we've got another call, Larry. You want to grab the button?
Sure. Welcome to Freethought Forum. May we have a name or nickname?
Hey, my name's Zach.
Hello, Zach.
Thanks for calling.
You have a question or a comment?
Yeah, a couple things, actually. You're familiar with the Big Bang Theory, of course.
Uh-huh.
I'm a physicist. I've been interested in it all my life.
Okay. There is one question that I have about it. If if all the matter in the universe came together and then exploded and created everything that we have now, when you look at different quadrants of the sky, some stars spin backwards, some stars spin clockwise and counterclockwise in the same quadrant. How could that be if, with some centrifugal force and everything, they should all be spinning in the same direction, correct?
No. In fact, what you should see is that for everything that's maybe spinning left hand, you should see something spinning right hand, so that on the average there is no spin. And in fact, when this has been done, they call it a survey of angular momentum, and when you survey the angular momentum of all of the galaxies that we can see, it adds up pretty much to zero. If you think about the Big Bang happening in 3 dimensions, actually more like 4 dimensions, of what we see on the 4th of July when fireworks go up in the sky, and you get this point where everything emerges from that. On the average, as much is moving left as is moving right. That's conservation of linear momentum. And for things where there's going to be spin, because some fireworks have spinning parts to it, that spin occurs because there's little jets of other stuff that's coming out the other way. So that's called conservation of angular momentum, and the surveys that have looked for it find that there is no appreciable angular momentum in the universe. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, sort of, Thomas.
All right. If you're interested in understanding the Big Bang better, there's a great book by Timothy Ferris called Coming of Age in the Milky Way. It is the story, it's a historical development of how science has come to understand the universe around us. It might be 20 years old now, so some of the most recent discoveries are not covered, but it's a great book.
Okay. I do have one more question.
Sure.
Uh-huh.
Okay, there is no known explanation why atoms hold together, correct? I mean, the 2 neutrons and the nucleus.
Well, you have the strong
yes.
force and the weak force.
Yeah, that's very well known. So it works like this. Here in the everyday world, we're experienced with gravity. If you're watching your television, I let go of the pen and it falls. That's gravity. Gravity is a force of attraction between objects that have mass. Now, my pen is made out of plastic. The plastic is going to be carbon and some hydrogen atoms that are bound together by electric charge. And that electric charge has the same mathematical form as gravity, where the farther apart they are, the less the force is. But
they're very tightly together.
But the atoms in this piece of plastic are close together, and the electric force on an atom of an electron is actually much stronger than the gravitational force of an electron by a factor of 1 followed by 40 zeros approximately. Some books say 38 zeros. Now, inside the center of an atom are protons and neutrons. They're held together by something called, there's a strong force and a weak force, and I think it's the strong force holds the protons and neutrons together. And then inside the protons and inside the neutron, there are smaller particles called quarks, and they're held together by, I believe it's called the weak force.
Yeah, that's the name of the forces, by the way. He's not just describing the forces, he's saying they are called the strong force and the weak force.
Yeah. So all of this is well understood, and in fact, the part about how electrons form atoms, that the theory corresponds to measurements to like 15 decimal places. It's the most accurate theory that humans have ever developed for explaining a portion of nature.
Yeah, because no matter what you believe, whether you believe in creation or evolution, it takes a great amount of faith to believe either side of the argument.
Well, no, it doesn't, because the point I demonstrated with dropping the pencil is that I know that's going to happen. And there's no faith necessary. And we also know that if I throw the pencil, it goes out farther, and if there was no atmosphere here, and if I could actually throw it at 5 miles a second, it'd go into orbit around the Earth. We know these things. There's no faith necessary, because
And they're repeatable. They're provable and repeatable.
Yeah. So it's a very different thing.
Okay, so you know that your body's energy never dies, correct? It just gets transferred from one thing to another, correct?
Yes, and the way I describe it is that if there is a God, this God is an accountant who is very, very, very concerned about energy, because he never loses any. And he's very, very concerned about angular momentum, because he never loses any. And he's very concerned about electrical charge, because he never loses any. Now, that kind of God, that kind of an accountant, is not Yahweh, though. You know who Yahweh is?
Yeah, Yahweh is the Hebrew name for God. It's the proper name for God.
Yeah, yes, the God of Abraham, we could say. Now, and of course here I'm doing it again, the God of Islam is Allah. Now, Allah is also the God of Abraham.
And the Jewish God.
So also Elohim is the name for the God of Abraham. And in my Gideon Bible, it also says, my name is Lord. He calls himself Lord as if it was the proper name.
Yeah.
And when he sent Moses, to Pharaoh, he said, tell him, I am sent you.
Yeah, I am.
Oh.
I am who I am.
And then he tried to kill Moses the very next morning.
Yeah. So,
Which is
I forgot where we were going with this.
That's fine. We can go up on a rabbit trail.
I think we followed a red herring somewhere.
So, Zach, how'd you find our show? Is this the first time you've seen us?
No, I called in once before and had some questions about evolution, and the one guy that's sitting on your right-hand side was on the show last time, and there was a younger gentleman on the left-hand side where you're sitting.
Okay.
So I've called before, but I was actually reading through my Bible, and it said that in Christ all things hold together, and I thought that was pretty cool. With the whole, nobody really knows what keeps an atom together and everything, and it was just pretty awesome. And one thing that
we just told you we do know.
Yeah, we have a good description. But I think when they're saying in Christ all things pull together, they're probably referring to a sense of community and culture. Don't you think that's what they really meant?
I try not to, think that I know exactly what the Bible's talking about a lot of the times, because, in my life I've realized that there's a lot of stuff in God's Word that just goes a lot deeper than
It's big mystery.
one thing to know,
I'm afraid you've got our audience laughing here, because that's our point. We don't think that the Bible is a very good book, because it has moral ambiguities that some people will use for devious means.
Yeah, they're still prosecuting children. Christians are persecuting children in Africa today as being witches.
Yeah,
because it says in the Bible, do not suffer a witch to live. There are things, homosexuals are being bullied and killed in some cases in America and other places in the world. And these prescriptions are found directly from the Bible. And the Bible is used as a justification for doing this stuff. Slavery was sanctioned by the Bible.
Yeah, the God's chosen people were in slavery.
I'm not talking about God's chosen people. They did the enslaving themselves in many cases, and on God's personal word told them to.
Yeah, if you read Leviticus, you'll find out how Jehovah, through Moses, instructs the Hebrews how they can keep slaves amongst the strangers who sojourn in their nation.
And even how to sell your daughter and what to into slavery and what to charge for her, and how to mark a slave.
So it's not a good book.
It's not a great book.
You can pick, if you're willing to pick and choose, you can make a good moral code out of it, but you have to pick and choose.
You have to be willing to toss out a whole lot of it.
In other words, you have to use your own true moral sense in order to find the good parts.
Right.
But where do true morals come from? People are generally evil.
Okay. Do you keep slaves?
Do I keep slaves?
Yeah.
No, I can't get enough for them.
Okay. Well, not even Jesus said you shouldn't keep slaves, and the Old Testament said you should. You should have them. So you don't keep slaves. So you're not keeping your morals about that from the Bible. You're getting your morals about that from your general society, the people that are around you, the people you have to interact with and work with. That's where you get your morals. It's a common contract with the people in your society and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what we're going to put up with, and what we're just not going to put up with. We're not going to put up with kidnapping or rape or theft or murder.
That's a great example. In Romans chapter 13, it says, obey all the laws of the land.
Yeah, and in other chapters it says kill witches and homosexuals. So you're picking and choosing. That's what I'm saying. You can't use the Bible as a moral source if you're going to do that type of thing. I mean, where would we be?
The Bible does.
Every single society on this earth has agreed on their own people internally that killing's a bad thing, stealing's a bad thing, lying is a bad thing, and not because they're Christians. Not because they're even Jewish or Islam. All societies have come to that conclusion without the Bible.
Okay.
Okay.
And another place in the Bible it says that God has written his laws on our hearts that we may not sin against them. So that's why everybody knows that certain things are bad.
But Zach, if
everybody knows that murder is bad.
If all people have come to the conclusion that murder is bad, it's easy for someone to write a Bible that said, well, God did it, but
yeah,
they can
God
also say the flying spaghetti monster did it.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's not proof that you've got it right just because there's a good idea in there. A good idea can come from other people's minds.
Yeah.
Well, true. I mean, the Bible was written over 3,000 years by 60 or 70 different people, from kings to peasants.
And it was put together by different councils since it was written. You know, there's a lot of books that were left out of the Bible. Did you know that?
Yeah,
The book of not Thomas.
There's a Thomas.
And there's Judas.
Thomas.
And there's a book of Mary even that was left out of the Bible. So men made those decisions. Men wrote the Bible, and men made the decisions on what to put in and what to leave out. Now, you can always back up on every single thing that we've said, well, God did it that way, God did it that way. But where's your proof? Where's your reasoning? This is why we put, does religion use false reasoning? They don't do much reasoning. They just back up, no matter what you say, they back up, well, God created everything so it would come out that way. And then you say, well, we have reasons to believe, and we have reasons to know that certain, like evolution is true. Well, God set it forward that, there would be religion people say God used evolution to create humans.
We're coming down to the end here, Zach.
I guess the only thing that I have to know that God's real in my life is 3.5 years ago I was living in a tent over here on Baxter Avenue drinking mouthwash. And I was living a horrible life. I was homeless. I was flying a sign on the interstate. I was in a state of decay to the point of death. And then when I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, He completely changed my life.
Well,
really much arguments with a changed life. You know?
Go ahead.
Well, Zach, it's good that your life is working better for you. We think that that's likely to be natural causes because you've changed your attitude.
And you used a lot of your own courage and strength to get there.
And for which we want to, wish you further luck. We're down to the last minute of our show,
and we need to close up.
So we want to move on. We invite you to call in on future shows.
I'll let you know I'll be praying for y'all guys, man, and I love y'all.
All right. Well, thank you for thinking of us. All right.
Okay.
All right. I hope you can start us closing. I don't know where mine is.
This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
Please send us feedback. Leave voicemail at 272-9060 or email us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
You can also send us questions by writing them on the back of Godless pre-1956 $100 bills and mail them to us, care of the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Just kidding about the dollar bills.
Here on Earth, you can see this show Tuesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on this Knoxville station or ctvknox.org. Adjust the time for the speed of light delay for anywhere else in the universe.
We would like to send our thanks to Sam and Jonas for technical support and to the staff of CTV Knox and all our callers.